Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week we are speaking with Danny Nemu. Danny is a writer, presenter, and researcher in the fields of psychedelics and the history of science. He's the author of Science Revealed and Neuroapocalypse, and joins us today to talk about entheogens in culture. Danny, welcome aboard.
Hello, Gordon. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. The traditional first question should be interesting. Danny, were you a weird kid?
No, I don't think I was a weird kid. I think everyone else was weird. And I kind of still maintain that. I remember a guy at school who could rattle off the goal scorers from the last 20 or 30 years of World Cups, and I thought that was a very weird thing to turn your attention towards. And to be honest, I couldn't really tell you what colour England plays in at the moment. So no, I don't think I was a weird kid. I think I was always interested in quite weird things, and I was quite inquisitive about why people think certain things that they think, or why people think anything in particular rather than anything else. And if you inquire far enough into why someone thinks something, it's normally because of conventions. I was never very good with conventions, so perhaps unconventional. Yeah.
Were you from like a unconventional or iconoclastic family that shared similar views, or were you the black sheep?
I think the unconventionality was kind of partly neurological, really. I was going to say suffered, but I haven't suffered. I profited from being someone on the autistic spectrum or on the Asperger's spectrum, and kind of people like that tend to struggle with, like, for example, left and right are conventional concepts. I'm pretty good with this side of the thing and that side of the thing. When I was growing up, I had to check, I remember I used to check which side my heartbeat was on in order to know which side was left and which side was right. So, when I'm on my bicycle and I approach a roundabout, even today, I always get confused which side do I have to give way on. And that kind of spreads out into everything, really. So, conventions. No, my dad, who's actually much more Asperger's than I am. I guess he dealt with it by being extremely conventional. In a way, that was kind of his response. Asperger's tend to like get some routines down. So I've got some routines which make things much easier. So when I get home, I know exactly where I'm putting my keys and stuff. But on more philosophical areas, I was always kind of inquiring as to why, and it's never been good enough just because because things are so. And you inquire far enough, and normally behind a convention, there's normally violence behind a convention. Really, why does a certain country end where it ends, and why does the next country begin where it begins? Is because a battle was fought there. And also, you see that in the academy as well. Why do people believe certain things, and why do certain disciplines have certain dogmas, I suppose, and it seems to be because that's where the last battle was fought. So I was never really satisfied with that.
Violence or fear, that's what creates boundaries. I think that's interesting. It's interesting you talk about the directionality stuff. My boss / first mentor in New Zealand was hugely dyslexic, and we were out at a meeting with some important clients, and he looked down at his hand and made an L shape. So he opened up his index finger and thumb, and that was his shortcut rather than the heartbeat to go, okay, if it makes an L, that's the left. We go in that direction. Yeah.
That would have been easier.
Yeah, I was thinking that, but maybe not if you're like, oh no, even with your hands on the bicycle handles, you could still kind of see that it's an F. But there you go, little tip.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I got to my mid-20s before I realized the left hand makes an L if you're looking at it. But fascinating. So, what were some of the books or experiences you had at that kind of young age? If you're already sort of, neurodivergent and everyone else but you was weird, how did that manifest in terms of kind of intellectual curiosity and examining boundaries and conventions?
Well, I kind of read everything. I was into comics, and I was into the Discworld stuff. I remember reading them. I remember one of the Discworld books. It was Pyramids, And it was the first book that made me laugh out loud. And I was actually in bed, and my folks came into my room, and they were like, what's going on with you? And I was laughing at this particular scene where I think it's one of the camels in pyramids. They're the best mathematicians in the universe. And this camel's calculating the trajectory of some spit that he's about to fire. So I spent a lot of time reading, and what else? I used to play. I used to play a lot of chess. I used to go to chess contests. I used to play at kind of a county level until I hit puberty. Really, that did for that. But I used to forget the days because I was always rubbish with dates, and I still don't know my sister's birthdays. My apologies to them for that. So I loved chess when I managed to arrive on the right day. What else? I got quite into music. I like playing drums, and I still like playing music. But I think I was quite bookish, basically.
Right. Were you from a religious or spiritual household, or was your house haunted or anything like that?
Well, it's kind of an interesting question. My immediate family was, and I guess still is, Reformed Jewish, which is kind of about as unspiritual as it gets. It seems to me this is I could say all kinds of things about with the direction that Judaism has gone as after the foundation of the State of Israel, but I'll maybe not go there. But my granny, on my mother's side, was a member of the Arthurius Society. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they were headed by a gentleman called Dr. George King, who was said to be a Western master of yoga. I think he was a drunken taxi driver, by all accounts, who hit upon the idea of starting a cult. But his cult was very interesting. They used to do alien contact type things. So my granny used to take me on her knee and tell me about what was going on in Venus, the industrial planet, and transmissions from Mars Sector 6, and all this kind of stuff. And she used to go up Holy Mountain once a year with her gang. And basically the Dr. George King had invited the ascended masters through his body into these 7 holy mountains. I might have a few of the details here wrong. And it energized these mountains. So the Arthurius Society people used to go up these mountains and form a circle around batteries and then pray into these batteries and release the batteries at times of great spiritual and also geological problems. So when there was an earthquake or something, off they'd go and they'd kind of release their batteries. And they're very into operations like Operation Prayer Power, for example. So when they had flying saucers were visiting, then your prayer and your healing would be kind of potentiated. So she was great, actually, my granny. She gave me a very interesting perspective on any kind of cosmology from a very young age, because it was very clear to me that people believe all kinds of strange things, and why would you believe, like I say, why would you believe one thing over another? And the other side of it was she was an accomplished healer. She was a spiritual healer, so she would place hands on, and she taught me how to do some visualizations when I was quite young, and used to basically fix diseases by the application of hands. So that was another thing, and she was quite respected by the rest of my family, I guess, as somebody whose hands definitely did something, although the kind of stuff that she believed in was absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was the rest of the family's opinion of Grandma in a cult?
I think the cult was very, very strange. It still is very, 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 very strange. Her funeral was amazing, actually. They had a chap in a purple tunic with a great big ohm around his neck, and it was a fusion of kind of Anglican ideas and spaceships and kind of Buddhist-y, Hindu, kind of somewhat influenced by theosophists, I think. And so, I can remember him at the funeral, and he started up by putting his arms out in a great cross and going, "Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti." And then off we went, and he was talking about what babies are trying to say when they speak, and all these crazy visualizations, and everyone else was from this very, very interesting spiritual lineage, and there was me and my rather straight family. I was absolutely loving it. It was by far the best funeral I've ever been to. It was pretty strange.
No,
And then my
cool.
grandmother on the other side was she was a graphologist as well. So that my interest in divination. I don't know if it's I kind of picked up an interest in that later, but there was an interest in. I guess graphology is examining the signs on the surface to work out what is going on underneath, and that's really what I'm about when I'm looking at divination for one thing, which is one of the things I'm into, but also just looking at the superstructure of, or looking at the surface of society to work out what the forces underneath are, and also also looking at how people behave. In my day job, I'm a hypnotherapist, so you're looking for very kind of slight clues in the way that people behave, the way people react to certain things, and then once you've got a fairly good idea of what's going on inside their heads, you put them into a trance and you go down to deep levels and start moving things around.
And I mean, what was it about hypnotherapy? Was that something you found young, or is that something you found later on as part of an inquisitive quest, or that kind of thing?
I wish I'd found it. It's one of those things that I really wish I'd known how to do when I was a younger man. It would have been very useful. When I was young, I was insomniac all my life, really, up until I started writing my first book when things changed. But basically, I developed all kinds of different, I guess I call them meditations or concentration exercises by myself. Like, for example, I can remember I used to have an image of somebody walking around a square, for example, every step connected to one breath, and that was just a kind of survival mechanism, or to try and get myself to sleep. So yeah, I was always kind of experimenting with different ways of kind of chilling out my own mind as well. That's another thing of people on the spectrum, and also I have had quite a racing and voracious mental appetite, I think, and at least until I encountered, until I started self-medicating with all kinds of lovely plants, that was quite difficult to get hold on. And then I used to do, and I have done, still do, public performance ritual as well, occasionally. And when I was teaching, because I was an English teacher for many years, I used to do visualizations with the kids. I was teaching maths. I remember teaching translation by getting kids to visualize pentacles in the air and making them flip. So I was often using magical techniques in my day job and in my own mind. But now, actually, as a professional hypnotherapist, that's come much more recently. I just finished training just earlier on this year.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm really, really enjoying it. It's brilliant.
Nice one. So, I mean, you mentioned some lovely plants there. Tell us about your first psychedelic experience.
Oh, first psychedelic. Let me think about that. Golly. Well, I got into cannabis quite young, probably about 15 or so, and that was it really, really helped me out in a big way. I always found it very, very pleasant and very, very creative and inspiring. But then when I was kind of growing up, I guess we're talking about I'm 40 now, so I was a teen in the 90s, and so we had quite a kind of rave culture, tail end of rave culture, I suppose. And I was never very good at the psychedelics in large rooms full of strangers and that kind of thing. So I had a few kind of scrapes, I think. I was much better in either in nature or in ritual. So I mean, I think my early psychedelic experiences were often kind of mind blowing, but also quite terrifying. And I remember one in particular that was probably, when would that have been? It would have been around the age of about 20 or so. Where I bombed a whole load of speed, and I was quite seriously paranoid for about 10 days, hearing footsteps behind me and shadows moving around. And I remember I was working at Yellow Pages at the time, and I remember looking up at the copy that I was typing up into the computer, and it was a list of rather than being an advert for sheds or something, it was a list of all my faults staring back at me. But even that was quite. That's in my second book. One of the chapters begins with that story, and it was a real a kind of a lens on just how much what we see is processed by what's going on before it gets into the conscious mind. So that really got me thinking as well about what else is warped, what else is twisted by the time we perceive it.
See, that I didn't realize. I'm familiar with Yellow Pages style jobs, but when I was in my early 20s and doing similar things like taking way too much speed on a school night, I was working for Virgin Records, so you'd go into work the next day and it was expected that you'd be messed up. So I can't imagine having done kind of classified ad stuff in my youth as well. Yeah. Gosh, way to make that job worse.
Indeed, yeah. No, I haven't really looked back. I gave it up on that day, and I like things more ritually arranged. I'm all into ritual, really, and I kind of we were talking about convention. I'm very happy with conventions as long as I know what they're doing there, and as long as I know when they begin and when they end. So the particular spiritual lineage which I'm involved in at the moment is Daime. And for me, the more old school and the more what's the word? I don't want to say rigid.
Situated.
But, situated. I think that's probably good. That's probably a good word for it. The better, because I find if you know what the rules are, what you're expected to do and what you're not expected to, you can it's like walls. If you've got a wall, you can lean against it. Whereas if you don't, you can get lost. So I got lost around a few free parties. I can remember some rather awful experiences at some squat parties and at some free parties as I was growing up.
All right, so let's because I'm a serious researcher, I was looking on your About page. Let's talk maybe about perhaps your most transformative psychedelic experience, because you mentioned Daime there. So do you want to tell us, that kind of story and how you ended up in Daime?
Yeah. Okay. So, I've been involved. I got involved with Daime in Japan. Actually, my ex-wife, who didn't speak very much English at the time, she said, "Do you want to go to a crazy drugs party?" To be honest, that's what she said, and I said, "Yeah, of course." And off we went. And when I arrived, it was the women were on one side and the men were on the other, and there were crosses, and there were people were dressed in blue and white outfits, and ties and white shirts and gold stars and all the rest. And I was like, what the hell am I doing here? And I made a beeline to the nearest, the only other foreigner, the only other white guy there, and I said, "Is this a church?" And he said, "Yeah, it's a funky church." And off we went. Oh
God! Really. And you still joined. If someone had said that to me, I'm like, "Thank you for your time. I'm going to leave."
No, it was, I kind of. I'm glad I did. I sat contemptuous as they began the prayer, and then I drank, and I felt suddenly very Jewish. Actually, I must say, when I encountered all these crosses and so on and so forth. But no, it was really interesting, and I in my background, I guess my occult background is chaos magic, so I was always quite happy to take on a reality tunnel, if you like, for a distinct period, as long as I knew there was going to be an end to it. So I kind of cut my teeth there in Japan. I drank there for 5 years.
It's not typically a known spiritual home of Daime. Is it popular there?
It kind of fits. Is it popular? Yeah, there's a couple of different groups, or at least there were when I was there, and it kind of fits with their nature in a way, because Japanese they're very dedicated, and Daime requires quite a lot of dedication. You've got to learn a whole load of Portuguese songs, and you've got to stand up and go from right to left, from right to left, from right to left, and beat a maracab, percussion instrument all the way through. And it asks you to be quite disciplined and quite uniform as well. That's one of the things which a lot of people, it kind of breaks you in a way, in a rather good way, because we have an idea, certainly in Europe and I think Australia as well, that we should be individuals, and the Japanese don't have that idea. The idea is a mature person is someone who's interdependent rather than independent. And in fact, if you're independent, they call it wagamama, which means kind of my way, if you like. And that's not a sign of maturity or integration. That's a sign of quite the opposite. That's a sign of not being of being immature if you want to stick out all the time. And that can be quite abrasive to certainly was abrasive to me when I first encountered it. But I'm very grateful for it. It kind of people say about Daime, it's much too weird for straight people, and it's much too straight for quite a lot of weird people as well, quite a lot of hippies, basically, if I was to be unkind. It was fairly, there were some big groups in Japan, and then I had a whole bunch of very formative experiences there. I can remember, things like realizing that I was a complete idiot. That was quite a good one. But then when I went to Brazil, so I came back to England for about a year and a half. After I lived in Japan for 6 years, which was wonderful. And then after a year and a half in England, I went off to Brazil. And in Brazil, I got bitten by a sandfly. And sandfly gave me a disease called leishmaniasis. And in Portuguese, it's called leishmaniosa, which is a beautiful word. But it's a bacterial colony, basically. So it bit me just underneath the chest on the left side, or just underneath the nipple, basically. And it made a pimple, and the pimple expanded, and it continued expanding until I had this kind of crater of a bacterial colony feeding on my flesh. And the next stage of this disease is it attacks the cartilage in your nose and your ears and your stomach and stuff, and it can really make a mess of your face. And I'd gone out to Brazil with two very specific goals, and one of those was to learn more about Daime and about the roots of Daime and about the power of Daime. And when I say Daime, I'm talking about ayahuasca plus the ritual there. And the other thing was I was halfway through writing a book, and I wanted the book was about many things, including the history of medicine, for example, which is my academic background, but also autonomy and anarchy and magic, and all those wonderful things. So it was a real opportunity. And there I was very ill. Everybody there thought I should take injections of antimonium tartrate. And I'd studied this kind of thing in, back at university on how interventionist pharmacological medicine has been pushing out more indigenous and traditional medical modalities. So I'd seen this played out, and I didn't buy that story at all. I think that the jungle has cures for jungle complaints. So I decided I was going to treat it with ayahuasca. I was going to treat it with Daime, and I did. So I spent 8 months quite ill. I lost 10 kilos, and I lost that wife. Actually, she came out to Brazil, and that all went horribly wrong again, as it had actually gone horribly wrong in Japan. So note to self: don't get back with the next wife. And sometimes it takes a little while to get the message, but it took away a whole load of things that I didn't need. And it was a test. It was a really interesting test. And the crux of it was this. It was like, there I was writing this book. The book was about autonomy, in a way, about taking control away from all the various different institutions and perceptions and a whole load of stuff which takes away your autonomy. So I wanted to cure myself. I wanted to learn about ayahuasca, and I did. So part of that involved, I was drinking every day for about 4 months at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was absolutely marvelous.
Were there any topical treatments for the leishmaniasis? I mean, how do you cure something that is a bacterial attack with ingesting a psychedelic?
Well, that goes quite right to the root of it, really. Mm-hmm. That's the miracle of incarnation. Yeah. What is our body and who is in charge of it, really? So how do you cure something? Ayahuasca is not particularly known for treating that particular disease. I did put it on topically. I put ayahuasca on the wound itself, and I also used other things. I used like the bark of some different trees, mulatera and a mango tree and a cashew tree, and I also did some fasts. I was doing lemon fasts to purify my blood. So I was drinking the juice of one lemon first thing in the morning, then fasting for 3 hours, and then not eating any, and then lots of lemon during the day. And the second morning you do it with 2 lemons, third day 3 lemons. You go all the way up to 10 lemons. Then the 11th day you go down to 9 lemons. So you do a kind of increasing number of lemons first thing in the morning. I did that twice. So the second time I started at 2 and went up to 20 lemons first thing in the morning, and then back down again. But the main thing was ayahuasca, and it was the sessions around that ayahuasca that happened. So for example, we've got songs. One of the songs goes, "Não tem medo de morrer. Se sair correndo é pior para você," which means don't be scared of dying, and if you run away, it's going to get worse for you. And there was one particular occasion where I did something which you really can't do in Daime, and that was I ran away. I left to work halfway through. I was having a terrible time. And the next day, it was absolutely clear that my wound was larger, the inflammation was larger, and it was serious. So and there's lots of hymns like that. There's one that goes, "Curo tudo, expulso tudo, com poder do Pai Eterno," which means I cure everything, I expel everything with the power of the Eternal Father. And I kind of tested those against myself. I wasn't naive. I wasn't naive to Daime. I'd been drinking Daime for about 7 years before I got that illness, and it had been completely full of magic. I would just think about something and it would happen for me, and sometimes all kinds of just weird and wonderful, very, very magical synchronicities had happened, and paths had opened, Abra Camino all over the place. And so it was an opportunity for me to really test it. And I mentioned my interest in the philosophy of science, and my degree was history and philosophy of science. So the philosophy of science and the medicine is really interesting, because people can tell you that they believe all kinds of things, but when they're actually sick and scared of dying is when you actually see what they really do believe. And I had no reason to doubt Daime in all the time that it was working, that things were going well for me. And then when things started to go badly for me, I was thinking, well, am I going to now ditch this tradition which has done nothing good but good for me? So, I learned a lot. I grew a lot. My whole worldview changed, and came out the other side with. I knew towards the end of it, I got nursed back to health by a woman who used to dream the future, and that's a whole other story. But it was sort of mental things. At one occasion, she dreamt about a bunch of glass in a certain place, and we went to this place. We went to a place, and she announced that it was here, and then she did in fact dig up a whole bunch of glass. And it was sacks and sacks of glass that she just started digging madly at the ground and pulling out all these chunks of glass. And it turned out that a macumbero, a black magician, had buried this glass in the 70s, and it had lain there forgotten about for years. So I saw all this weird stuff, and anyway, so I came out with her, and we had 2 kids. We had twins actually, and it was immediately after I recovered. I was celibate for the whole thing, and immediately after I recovered, I had a really interesting day when we were in. I had to skip the country because my visa was totally out of date by that point. So we went off to Bolivia, and then off to Peru. And when we were in, I thought it was Bolivia, but she says it's Peru. And anyway, I went to the internet cafe one day, and 2 people had dreamt about me, and they told me they'd emailed me to tell me they dreamt about me. And one person emailed me to say that they had just got pregnant and they were very happy, and one emailed me to say they just had a kid and they're very happy. And I emailed someone saying, do you think if I went home and impregnated this woman, all my problems would go away? And I went back to the hostel and opened the door, and the first thing she said to me was, should we have a child? And I said yes. And we did basically, and she fell pregnant immediately. And the 2 children that we had were both born, it was twins, and they're both born with birthmarks in the same place where I have my wound from that.
That is cool.
The ulcer. Yeah, that's all expanded on in much more detail in a talk that I've got online somewhere or on my website, which is it's called Myth, Magic, Mind-Bending Medicine, and I can't remember, but lots of stuff beginning with M.
What was the opinion of the Daime folk around you while you were, looking to? 2 questions. That one, to cure the leishmaniasis, and also when you watched Empire of the Serpent, was it this takes me back?
Well, okay, so
that was when I first heard of leishmaniasis, and I think it's terrifying. Is the context for that?
Yeah, it's pretty grotty. It's a nasty, it's a nasty illness, man. It's not like it's not that painful. I mean, it hurts somewhat, and there's certain phases of it which hurt because you have to put a bajo, what do you call that stuff? Like a mud pack on it. Basically, what happens is it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it swells in in a kind of pus-filled boil until you decide it's time to take the lid off it. And you do that by sticking a mud pack on it, and you sleep with the mud pack on it, and in the morning it drops off, and then you do the whole cycle over and over again. So you've got an open flesh wound again. And there's, but in terms of actually, it's not like getting malaria or something. It's not like massive fevers and sickness. It's just terrifying, It won't go away, and it was 8 months, and I lost 10 kilos. Like I said, one stage I had worms crawling out of my chest because it got infected with something, and I pulled a whole bunch of worms out of my chest, and yeah, really weird. So to come back to your question, what was the opinion of the Daime folk around me? The Daime folk around me, it was in I can probably say a degraded lineage, I think is probably what I would call it, but they had lost track of the power of their own medicine, and they'd lost faith in it, really. And that part of Brazil went through massive changes in a very short amount of time. And when people from out of the country, but actually people from the rest of the country who weren't caboclos, weren't from that particular region, arrived in the kind of 60s, 70s, they bought a whole load of stuff, including everything from kind of clothes and types of clothes to perfume and a whole bunch of new ideas. And medicine was really in a very expansionist phase there. And now Brazil is the most medicalized country on earth, I think. The number of cesareans they have is completely absurd, and they're all really, really into their pills and white coats and all that jazz. So the people around me thought I was crazy, and they thought I was going to either be massively disfigured or die. And they got very cross with me. They said, "Look, here, I'll get you, come into my car and we'll drive around the city, and you can see all the people whose noses have fallen off." And I isolated myself completely in the end. I lived in a very small community, and people would just say to me every time they saw me, they'd be like, "Have you taken your injections yet? Have you taken your antimonium tartrate yet?" And when I first got it, they said, "You've got to take injections. You've got to take a heavy metal injection." I was like, "No way I'm taking a heavy metal injection into my body." So no, they were really, really against it, with a very few exceptions, people who did help me out. And one of those who did help me out was a gentleman by the name of Padrino Nonato, who is the son of Padrino Wilson. This will mean something to people who know a bit about Daime. And Padrino Wilson was the curandero of Mestre Ireneo, who's the founder of Daime. So he's a kind of man with lineage as a great curandero. And I went to him, and I tried to cure it in a different, house, if you like, or a different lineage. And I went to him and I said, "Can you cure this?" And he said, "Well, no, not really. You should go to the hospital. You need to take your injections." And I said to him something on the lines of, "But I thought you were a great curandero. Your father was a great curandero. I thought you were a great curandero." And he said, "Okay. This is what you have to do." I think he was just testing me to see if I was, see I had the gumption. He said, "Here, first thing, don't listen to anybody." And he sung a particular line of a hymn to me, which is, sempre segue o seu caminho, deixa quem quiser falar, which means always follow your path and let those who want to talk. And he made the gesture of covering his ears while he did it. So he said, very important that you don't listen to other people. Now you've made your decision. And he gave me some Daime, which was a kind of an auspicious and a Daime that had been made quite a long time ago by a very fantastic person. And off we went. So he was behind me with some persuasion, but no, the people around me, they thought I was nuts, to be honest.
So you mentioned the history and philosophy of science. What's science getting wrong, most wrong, I guess, about these compounds and allies? Most wrong, because otherwise it's a 5-hour podcast.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think how to approach them is, this is what comes to mind at the moment, because there was an article just came out. There's been a bunch of articles. I was particularly offended by one recently published by Chacruna. It's entitled "Racism and the Prejudice Against Cannabis by Ayahuasca Users in Brazil," and I've just written a rebuttal or a response to this article. But the problem, it's written by an anthropologist. I won't mention his name here, but he he's analysing daime from within the academy, and in anthropology, basically, it is forbidden for you to postulate the existence of invisible things, entities, all that kind of thing. When I say forbidden, like just a very recent example, anthropologist by the name of Jack Hunter submitted a chapter to a book. I think the name of it was The Supernatural in History, Culture, and something or other. And his chapter was rejected, and the editors got back to him and said, there's nothing wrong with your chapter, but elsewhere in print, you have collected evidence for the reality, for the ontological existence. I can't remember the exact term that was used, but the reality of entities, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the idea
which he has. Anyway, carry on. I know Jack has been on the show, so yeah.
Oh, right, cool. Yeah, he has, and good for him.
Exactly.
The idea that you can, anthropology has been racist from its outset. 19th century anthropology, 20th century anthropology, when great anthropologists were putting pygmies into cages and exhibiting them at the zoo. It's an incredibly racist. Well, it has been it's got an incredibly racist history, and now that racism, I think, has kind of gone underground in a way. The idea that you are not allowed to present evidence for something that brown people in the global South believe is just quite fantastically neocolonial. And I don't know, maybe it's postmodern as well, extreme relativism.
Couldn't agree more. And it comes back to the entire Psy spirit conversation, because it's not just the brown people in the global South, it's all people in all time, except for the 4% that actually genuinely believe it, who live today. And they are, and it's you see it in the Guardian articles and the rest of it, even if they hand wave like you're sort of complimenting a child's finger painting on the fridge, they hand wave like, oh, it's all right, you can believe whatever you want, but this is it's there in the subtext, which is, but as a matter of fact, you are wrong, and we for some reason are correct. And it's that it's such a bizarre mind virus. If they actually had 1 week of the degree that you actually did, they'd actually kind of probably be a little bit more humble with their racism.
Indeed, and I don't think humility is humility isn't part of the post-colonial exercise. There's certain dogmas that are there, and they are dispassion. I mean, that's one. You're meant to be dispassionate when you argue about something. If you get cross because you actually care about what you're talking about, oh my God, you get into trouble. And I've got into so much trouble. So what's the worst thing? I could give you a whole list of things which are awful about specifics about where science has gone wrong, but it's the whole structure of it which is wrong. I mean, wrong is an incorrect word. That's not fair. It produces all kinds of interesting things, but it's a spectacularly limited thing. I know you had Bia Labati on the podcast a little while ago, and it was a wonderful podcast to listen to. And she was on BBC just the other day, and they were talking about ayahuasca. And they had this dude who was a psychiatrist. Is on BBC Two, and just to listen to the guys. There's a guy talking about, these things haven't been tested. We haven't done double-blind clinical blah, 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 blah. And the idea that if you do a double-blind clinical trial on something that's been used for hundreds of years, if not more, if not thousands, in the jungle, and then therefore it suddenly becomes something that's kosher. I mean, it's just unbelievably arrogant. It's unexamined arrogance. And what do you do with unexamined arrogance,
It's that unexamination that I find so frustrating, because you're absolutely correct. And that it's trying to eat soup with a fork. As you say, there are some things that this sort of protocols is very useful for, but if you use the fork for everything, it just doesn't work. My father's a psychiatrist, and we had this conversation ages ago, because he's actually... because mother's an energy healer and all that kind of channel and such, so he's sort of somewhere in the middle. But he says historically, from the history of medicine in the 20th century perspective, medicine's been suspicious of compounds that do more than one thing. So psilocybin might, for instance, instantly cure depression, which it does, but it also gets you high, and you can't. It doesn't have the right set of isn't the right intellectual framework to turn that into a medicine. And the whole thing is pathetic because, as you say, it's been done for, depending on the molecule or the plant ally, or mycelial ally, it's been happening for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And the worst part, you turn it backwards and go, okay, Mr. Double-Blind Trial, the only reason Prozac got onto the market was because they top-shelved the fact that it did nothing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you want to talk double-blind trials, it's a fraudulent system.
Yeah, indeed. It can't handle complexity. That's it. You talk about like one compound can do many things, and you look at something like ayahuasca. In fact, one of the guys on this show on BBC Two, he was saying one of them said, it's what's the important molecule there is DMT, and I was thinking, well, and the other guy said, well, actually, it's not just DMT. It's really this thing's got to be studied very deeply because actually, it's not just DMT. It's DMT plus an enzyme inhibitor. And thinking, actually, man, this is thousands and thousands of chemicals interacting with thousands of chemicals in your body, and you can't. You can't take the chemical out of the plant, and you can't take the plant out of the jungle. Well, you can take the plant out of the jungle, but then you stick it in a lab away from. When I did my cure, I was doing a whole load of ceremonies. I was also doing a whole load of prayers, and when I took, like for example, when I went to go and get the cask, what do you call it? Is that an English word? The bark of a cashew tree. I would make a poem up for the tree as I was harvesting it. Yeah. You can't do double-blind trials on that kind of thing. No. And it comes to, I mix with some academics. I haven't been kicked out of their gang just yet. And a particular list I'm on, the question was sent to the list or by a layman who said, does ayahuasca cure cancer? And the academics kind of rubbed at their beards for a while, and they got back to this, the person who's asked the question, clearly someone who was dying of cancer, and said, there is no empirical evidence of ayahuasca curing cancer. The answer to the question, does ayahuasca cure cancer, if you are a psychiatrist from some university in the US, is, I don't know. Go and ask somebody who does know. I've got two friends who were diagnosed with terminal cancer, and we're going back decades now, and they're absolutely fine. It cured it for them. You've got your N equals 1 group right there.
Yeah, absolutely. This and it's interesting in that kind of no atheist in the foxhole sense that my experience with academia, particularly after Starships came out, was that just going back to Jack Hunter's experience that you just mentioned, it's this game because they all know it. I don't speak to that many anthropologists, but maybe 5. They all know that there is the ontology of academia, of anthropology, even after even after De Castro and everything, is still too limited for the reality of spirits, or non-human persons, or whatever you want to call it. They all know it, and they're still playing this game as if it's like children playing dress up, and I find it very frustrating.
Yeah. And imagine how frustrating it is if people are dying as a result of it, or people aren't having their depression cured, or whatever, But I don't know. I don't want to get too riled up.
Yeah. Was that
too short?
Was that? Was that something you were interested in before you found Daimi? So if this is what you did at university, for instance, was your particular focus on the role of psychedelics / entheogen / whatever term that isn't hallucinogen that you want to use for them? Was that a particular interest, or was it the entire? Is it more about that borders and boundaries and conventions thing from your childhood, which is like you have found a way of constructing reality that is, in the modern day, arbitrary because it was a 19th century sort of imperial power model, and that's not really in play anymore.
So I think, I certainly think psychedelics had an effect on the way I would approach the subject matter. I'm with that. That's without a doubt. But no, I wasn't particularly interested, and I didn't really know very much about how indigenous people handled their psychedelics and what the power structures there were, and So no, I mean, I did my dissertation I was looking at Jehovah's Witnesses and comparing their beliefs on the body and technology and sex with kind of 17th century American puritanical groups. Basically, I was looking at people who were fascinated by the apocalypse or interested in the apocalypse, and that was really what caught my attention was the apocalypse, and that's been my overwhelming fascination for, well, at least since I was a teenager, in various different guises, and exactly what the apocalypse means to me has changed over a long period. My last book is called Neuroapocalypse, and in that I'm looking at the unveiling in terms of perception and neurobiology and also linguistics. So what do we see and what do we miss? According to what language you speak, according to what we're scared of, according to what we're expecting, and according to a whole load of other stuff. But no, my interest in, I guess, different modalities, health modalities, was not, I mean, my mum is an acupuncturist, so that always interested me from that perspective. And I was kind of fascinated by the arguments that have gone on over homeopathy, for example, over Indian medicine. It's coming back to that thing about convention. Why do people take pills from a white bottle rather than stick pins in their arms? And a lot of it is because of realpolitik.
Yeah,
and we often talk about colonialism as if it's something about bodies and as if it's something about territory. And yes, it certainly is about bodies and it's about territory. But almost more terrifying is the colonialism of the mind. And there's a fantastic book. It's by Ethan Waters called Crazy Like Us. I can't remember the subtitle, but it's something like the exportation of the American psychiatric model or something like that. And he looks at different case studies, and one of them is PTSD. In the wake of the tsunami, basically, all these aid groups went over in their thousands to try and help, in inverted commas, third world people deal with the trauma that was left in the wake of the tsunami. And they were entirely uninterested in the models for dealing with trauma that was already there. And I'll give you an example. I think it's from Sri Lanka. But these groups arrived in Sri Lanka, and they found that people who'd lost their houses and everything would go off to the refugee camps, and they stay there for a few days, and then they go, I want to go back to my community. And the aid workers would say, no, you haven't processed it properly yet. Have some more Zoloft, and let's talk to you. Let's do some talking therapy, even though we don't understand your language. And they were like, no, we need to go back to my community, because they saw the locus of the damage in the connections between people, whereas the kind of PTSD diagnosis, which is actually younger than I am, I'm 40 years old, PTSD is younger than me, they saw the locus of the problem in the psychology of the individual. And the symptoms were very different as well. So, for example, the people there complained of joint pain. Right? Now, that's not part of the PTSD diagnosis, joint pain. But it's quite interesting because joints are the parts of your body which connect up two different limbs or two different parts of the body. So that kind of fascinates me. And also, obviously, as a hypnotherapist, when you see all kinds of problems, medical problems, whatever, they often symbolically manifest something psychological and even cosmological, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it does to this audience, that's for sure. You mentioned that, it took a while, just because it wasn't what you were studying at the time, to become interested in, I guess, indigenous modes of interacting with, various allies and non-human persons and so on. But let's indigene ourselves. Danny, are there any drugs in the Bible?
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, there's a stack of drugs in the Bible. I mean, where to begin? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I mean, gold, we can leave that one aside, although that does certainly make people mad. But frankincense is a GABA receptor agonist, works on the same system as the Valium and all that jazz. It doesn't work in the same way as Valium. It's much more pleasant. Actually, I'm not familiar with Valium. I can't say that. Wouldn't be an empirically sound statement. But it's, the dosage, best way to learn about these things is to eat them, really. So the dosage for frankincense is about the size of 2 peas, as in 2 garden peas. So a few grains to make about that volume. If you have much more than that, you'll start to offend the intestinal, the flora in your intestines. So frankincense works on the GABA system. Myrrh works on the opioid system. Mu and delta opioids. There are stacks of drugs in the Bible. There's the anointing oil is interesting stuff. It's called shemen hamishcha, and mishcha comes from the word mashach, and mashach means to wipe or to paint. It's where we get the massage from, in fact. And so the anointing oil was something that was massaged into people, specifically into priests and kings. It was massaged into them in order to give them an experience of Yahweh. And it contains cassia and cinnamon and myrrh and canare balsam, which I won't go into here, but it's basically cannabis. I mean, it's speculative, but it's not really a great speculation. Everyone in the region used cannabis. Yeah. And there's lots of reasons.
It would be more surprising if it wasn't. It would be more surprising if it was absent from Palestine rather than found in Palestine.
Yeah, well, it was Palestine was on a trade route, basically, and it wasn't found in Egypt. Well, it was found in Egypt, but it wasn't grown in Egypt, so it had to come in through Palestine. And canare balsam is described as from a faraway place in the Bible. So, definitely. The Scythians had it, and the Greeks had it, and the Persians had it, and the Assyrians had it, and everyone had it, really. But what's kind of interesting, there are stacks and stacks of drugs in the Bible. There's mandrake, there's this, there's that, and the other. But what's really interesting is the technologies of combination. So that massage oil, for example, it contains cinnamon, and cinnamon contains eugenol, which is what you make MDMA out of, and cassia contains estradiol, which is described as having an electric LSD-like effect. But those two compounds are broken down by your enzymes, P450 enzymes. So those enzymes need to be inhibited if you're going to get anything out of those plants. And the way that you inhibit them is with other plants. And it's just the combination which is described in the Bible, which contains both inhibitors and these powerful psychedelic compounds, which is quite interesting. Sorry, you took a deep breath.
I did. Well, just for people, a presentation you gave at Breaking Convention was put up on YouTube where the premium members have just finished up the journeying course, and I got to the bit where we were talking about the use of, journeying aids in recorded history, and that was one of them. And I like from Masha and what you were saying, Messiah, the Messiah means anointed, and it's that kind, well, more or less. So what you find in the Bible is essentially a psychedelic anointing oil, and you also have the idea of God in a human person associated with an oil that in some instances is psychedelic, and it's lovely pieces. But the bit that I thought was when you talk about the technology of it, if you want to tell people about the tabernacle incense, because I'll have the presentation linked up below the podcast for people listening if they go to runesoup.com. But I've been to that party, put it that way.
You've been in the tabernacle?
Well, I've been in a hot box tent growing up.
Oh, nice.
That's, you got to make your own fun growing up in regional Australia. And yes, getting really, really high in a tent in a paddock rather than a desert, been there.
Right, okay, well, good for you. Back in the day, before the pipe was introduced to the Middle East, the way people got high was by hotboxing tents, as you say. So the Scythians, for example, were described in about the 5th century BC by Herodotus, who visits them. He says they folded down the flaps of their tents and they threw cannabis on the fire, and as the steam came up, they would jump up and shout for joy, and it's better than any Grecian vapor bath. So this was quite well-known technologies all over the world, actually. So you find it in China, you find it in the Oracle at Delphi in her cave, hotboxing the cave as well. But in the Bible, there are about 5 chapters given over to describing the tabernacle, the dwelling place of Yahweh on earth, right? And nothing in the Bible gets anything like that kind of detail. That the Tower of Babel is over in about half a chapter, and the 10 Commandments, which is another point. There are actually 10 of them, and they're not commandments, but let's leave that one behind. That gets kind of half a chapter here and half a chapter there. But you get 5 chapters, and it describes this piece of kit, and it describes everything about it. It describes its dimensions. It describes what everything's made of. It describes how big the hooks are, and how many rings there are, and how It's massive. It's really, really intricate how it's described. And what you end up with is a tent. And at the back of that tent is a chamber. And that chamber has an acacia frame. Everything's made out of acacia. Acacia, by the way, is the highest concentration of DMT in the region. So you've got a box, an acacia frame. And around that frame are 4 materials, skins and materials. So 2 of them are pulled tight around that frame, and then another 2 of them are kind of pulled as a kind of windbreak. So you've got a chamber there with these leather. One of the materials is something that shoes were also made out of. So we know it's a thick leather of some description, and you end up with a 3.5 meter cubed box, basically at the back of the tabernacle, and there's a veil at the entrance to it, and certainly in the time of the temple, the veil is described in the Talmud as the thickness of a man's hand, right? Which raises a question. If the veil was there to keep prying eyes out, why would it need to be so thick? And if the veil was there to keep Yahweh in, well, a bit of leather isn't going to do it, surely, if you conceptualize Yahweh as this kind of mighty war god. So what the veil would have done was it would have made an airtight chamber in the back of the tabernacle, and the only thing that was done in that chamber was the high priest would go in after he had been anointed with this anointing oil, which contains all these interesting psychedelic compounds, and he would go in with a censer and handfuls of finely ground incense. So we're not talking about a little stick of patchouli or something. It's handfuls of incense, and inside that room is the magic box, the Ark of the Covenant, and he would burn incense, and it kind of describes how the cloud will cover the Ark and the mercy seat, and how Yahweh will speak from within the cloud, or how the angels will appear in the cloud, and it's described in that kind of language. So it was used exclusively for burning incense and for talking to angels. And now that incense contains about 16 ingredients, and I'm just going to run through them here. You've got onycha, we don't know what that is, but galbanum, which is a GABA agonist. You've got frankincense, which is a GABA agonist. You've got myrrh, which works in the opioid system. You've got cassia, which contains estradiol, that electric LSD-like stuff. Spikenard, which is very interesting. That's the stuff that Jesus' feet are washed in. And that boosts GABA, and it boosts dopamine, and it boosts serotonin as well. It's described as a nootropic, which means it helps you remember things, which is quite interesting because this kit was used for the high priest to connect with angels and to get information. It was a divination box, basically, divination by psychoactive smokes, and you need to remember stuff that you divine, obviously. And then it's got saffron in it. Saffron, what does that contain? That's a GABA agonist as well. And you've got costus, which is, I think that one works in the opioid system. And what else have you got? Cinnamon and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's a whole... sorry, I made a mistake. It's actually a 4.5 meter cube chamber. So you've got a whole stack of these incenses, and off the high priest would go on his own, right, which is a shamanic format. But back in the day, before kind of ayahuasca tourism and that, the shaman would go off on his own or her own into their tent with their magical objects and their familiar spirits, and then they'd come back with often stuff for war divination. You know, when do we attack? When do we retreat? When do we ambush? Which is what Moses or the high priest would come out of the tabernacle with. He'd say, okay, now it's time to move. And now in that story in the Bible, they follow a pillar of smoke, right? A pillar of smoke. And we tend to get the idea that this pillar of smoke appears from above the tabernacle, the back of the tabernacle, because when you see cheesy Christian evangelical websites, that's how they draw it. But it actually, in terms of the text, it appears at the door of the tabernacle. So this guy goes into the chamber, and when he comes out, he opens his thick veil, and then they open the thin veil, and this smoke comes pouring out of the tabernacle. And one of the things that it contains is Nebtadini pyrotechnica, and that is the Hebrew word for that. Means that which causes smoke to rise. It's the stuff that's used in fireworks. I think it's to make them fly straight. I'm not sure, but basically it makes smoke rise, and it's described in kind of ancient texts how the rising of the smoke is a good sign. So you can imagine the scene. This pillar of smoke appears at the front of the tabernacle, and then out comes the high priest, and he says, "Right, pack up your stuff, and off we go." So we get this. The Bible talks about following the pillar of smoke. I think what we're talking about there is the people following the shaman, and the shaman getting his information from the pillar of smoke.
Yeah, and this there's a variant of the history and philosophy of science when it comes to Bible studies and early archaeology, which is Victorians were very squeamish about a lot of things, and Bible studies is very much the sort of kind of hobby of retired vicars back in the day. So there's a squeamishness about looking at these things which doesn't match the historical evidence, because you have other examples like mana and the possibility that, the Apocalypse of St. John looks like a psychedelic vision and there's a cave involved. And if you widen it out to the sort of Eastern Mediterranean at the time, everyone was, you would take opium for a toothache. So the idea that they weren't, the idea that they didn't have more nuance in which allies were used where as just a baseline. I mean, they don't have drug and vegetable and categorizations the way we do. And it just seems like, and the other thing I think is important for people listening, because this comes back to how we conceptualize them. If you were to try to describe the use of mind-altering components of something like tabernacle ritual, the implication when you write about it in the 21st century is that it's fraudulent, like the Wizard of Oz, where this is how they deluded themselves into thinking that they were talking to God. That's not correct. Like even if the sort of use of, I forget what it was called, that makes the smoke go up. You just mentioned it.
It was Nettadini Pyrotechnica.
Yeah, so that would have been deliberately used because God has to get back up, having come down to say hello. So you look at it and go, they're even conceptualizing it. It's not like they were bamboozled by the use of these molecules. They knew, they wouldn't have molecules, but they knew full well that these substances could do things. It's just that they've characterized them differently.
Indeed, and they have taboos around how you use them as well. So in the Bible it says, don't drink strong drink before you go into the tabernacle. And when you're in the tabernacle, when the oil is upon you, don't go out of the tabernacle. And it's very good advice for any psychedelics session. Don't get smashed beforehand, and don't go stumbling through the streets once you're under the effect. But you kind of raise an interesting question there, because does it mean that Yahweh is a product of allylbenzene psychopharmacology? And I would kind of respond to that by saying, I wear glasses, and when I put my glasses on, people's faces come into focus, and when I take them off, they're not in focus.
Absolutely.
Does that mean that your face is a product of my glasses? No, it doesn't. I personally believe that these forces described in the Bible, and they are forces, that's the word for them, Elohim or powers, are different drives that move in our heads and possibly outside our heads, but most importantly in our heads. And one of those is the Yahweh drive, which is the drive to love your friends and to hate your enemies and to expand and to take territories. And that fortifies you in some ways, and it hoodwinks you in other ways. And in the text, you've got other ones as well. You've got El Shaddai, for example. There's an interesting one. He's the guy who tells Abraham to sacrifice his son, which is what reptiles do. Snakes eat their children. Mammals don't, right? El Shaddai is really interested in increase. He's interested in territory, that kind of thing. So he says to Abraham, sacrifice your son. So Abraham goes off and goes, yeah, right. And then the angel of Yahweh comes along, who's a different god, in fact, the emissary of a different god, and says, don't sacrifice your son, sacrifice somebody else. So it's a kind of, you quite often get this in the Bible. You get one god name will say one thing, and then one god name will say another. And then you get the prophets, who I believe are a later stage of the brain, if you like, the frontal lobes, which inhibit Yahweh. So, for example, Yahweh wants to annihilate the tribe, but Moses says, don't do that, remember the good old days, this be far from thee to do. And Yahweh repented of the evil, that's the word in the Bible, which he sought to do. So this idea of good God and bad God, this comes much, much later. We're talking, in the Revelation of St. John, there's a kind of there's something of all those kind of gods getting mashed up together, and then in Christianity generally, you get a kind of dichotomy of the Prince of Darkness against the really good guy. But you look at the text, it's not even monotheistic back in the day. You've got we could go on.
No,
for
well, I
hours about
agree.
this.
Yeah, well, I agree completely. So in the sort of premium member weekly chats we do, I go to pains to describe the Christian God specifically as Greco-Palestinio-Egyptian, because you have that kind of mushing together into monotheism as a sort of classical artifact. But if you read the actual Bible, and if you read general Jewish mythology and different versions of the stories of different angels, it is crazy town, and it's fantastic. It's this big, delightful mess. And typically in the magical community, people reject something like Christianity or examining biblical mythology because they've grown up in some happy, clappy monstrosity in the US, and it's so much more interesting than that. If you're like, you could certainly be pagan, but remember that this stuff is as pagan as it gets. So you don't have to go and find it. You can go and find it if you resonate with it, but remember that you are situated in something that couldn't be more crazy pagan.
Yeah, so you get lines in Exodus like, now I know that Yahweh is more powerful than all the gods of Egypt, and that's not monotheism, not by a long shot. I guess one of the things which really interests me there is what happened when the language changed from Hebrew to, kind of Aramaic and Greek. So Hebrew is Afro-Asiatic language and is very much more poetic, for one thing, as in words can mean completely different things according to how you pronounce them. And it doesn't have this kind of abstract third-person singular that Greek and Latin and English has. So, for example, in Hebrew, or rather in English, when it's raining, you say it's raining. It rains. So, what exactly is that it? And what's cold when it's cold, or what's awful when it's awful? Now, in Hebrew, in Greek, that's the case because that third person singular is there. Now, in Hebrew, that is not the case at all. So, for example, in Hebrew, it is Yored Geshem, which means falling rain. So it's the rain itself, which is the agent, right? So you have all these. Hebrew, by its very grammar, postulates different forces with different powers, if you understand what I mean. Whereas Indo-European language is kind of almost force the existence of one greater power. Yeah, which does a whole lot of other things.
Built for monism and built for a centralization of agency, which makes these things very confusing. I think some Greek translations have done a reasonable job of attempting to have more than one meaning in the words. But yes, it's an eternal translation challenge, and it's really exciting that it's really exciting to discover if you've grown up in what you would maybe have considered either disappointing or barren, a spirituality. Even if you don't resonate with it, it's almost like an ancestral exercise to realize just how crazy and magical the stuff that's always been there. That maybe even if you missed it, it's still there.
So all of that stuff is described in my second book, Neuroapocalypse. What I wanted to say there was that the Greek text, right? So if you look at the Gospel of John, for example, has got some extraordinary poetry in it. So the Greek has to do through the arrangement of words what Hebrew can do with the actual words themselves, if you like. I'll give you a quick example of that. So there's this line in Genesis. It's Genesis 3, first line, which goes, "And the snake was more subtle than any creature which Yahweh Elohim had made." Right? Now, that word subtle is the same Hebrew letters as a word in the previous line, which is, and the man and the woman, I think that's what it says, the man and his wife were naked and they were not afraid. And that word naked and the word subtle are the same word. It's what is the word? Oh God, it's completely slipped my mind there. It'll come back to me in a moment. But it's completely the same word, which means both naked and subtle. When you think about subtle, describing the snake, who's the bad guy, and you think about naked, describing the innocence of the couple. And the way that Hebrew works, the way you pronounce things is set by the vowels, and the vowels don't exist until about the 7th century AD, when they were set by these kind of reactionary, the Masoretes, who decided this was how the text is meant to be understood. So the words are arum and arome. So arum is subtle, and arome is naked, but it's written in exactly the same way. So Hebrew, you can do that kind of stuff. Now, you can't really do that in Greek, but you can do it in terms of poetry. So the beginning of John, so John begins with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, according to Aristotelian thought, the laws of logic, if you like, something either is or it isn't, and it can't be both one thing and the other. So the idea of the Logos being both with God and God is an affront to Aristotelian logic, and it's an affront to logic generally. How can something be something and with something at the same time? And in fact, everyone who talked about the Logos, Heraclitus, for example, Philo, all of these people, whenever they talk about the Logos, they talk about it in terms of paradoxes. They say, for example, Philo says it's the glue and chain which brings everything together, and it's also the divider of all things. So it's that which brings together and that which separates apart. So I think what I was saying with what you can do with what you can do with words, specific words in Hebrew, you have to do with word constructions in Greek. But it is in there. It's very much in there in the text. And you get kind of interpretations of John 1, which are just, I mean, how can you look at that extraordinarily, it's beautiful poetry. It's absolutely beautiful poetry, and make that boring, you know? Yeah. And that's what Christians have managed to do. Terrible.
It is like hats off to them in many respects. Like how did you? It's like it's like ruining Star Wars. I mean, you really went to some effort to do this.
Yeah. So then we're talking about all the way back to convention again. You know, why do we believe, or why do we believe? Why do the Catholic Church believe that Thomas touched Jesus? Right. The whole idea of doubting Thomas. You know, that line is extraordinary because Thomas goes to touch Christ arisen, and then he says, "Oh my God!" And there's nothing about whether he touches or doesn't touch. Right now, the popes came along and they said he touches. That's the dogma. Resurrection in the flesh and all that jazz, and all the kind of Gnostic text which talked about Jesus walking without leaving footprints, and Jesus appearing in visions like he did in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, for example. All that kind of stuff gets flushed away because you can't control an empire if you've got people who are taking instructions from visions and invisible voices and things like that. But if you look at that line where it talks about Thomas touching flesh, the very line beforehand, Jesus walks into a room where all the doors are closed. You know, so you don't have to look very far into the text to see exactly the opposite of what the councils and what the popes fabricated. Not fabricated, it's all a fabrication, but what they constructed as a suitable set of conventional beliefs with which to govern an expanding empire.
And it's that bit that then tumbled down through Protestantism to become the kind of dire flyover megachurch American experience. And by that point, there is like the water coming out of the tap is all feces. there's no actual water in it at that point. And for me, I think we're in a kind of the beginnings of a golden age, and we'll sort of wind up with this and do the next steps. We're at the beginning of a golden age where 18th, 19th century biblical studies was retired Anglican vicars. Parts of the 20th century, particularly in the post-war, post-Nag Hammadi and so on. There's a brief flowering there in the 60s where people had kind of like Jungian inspiration. And then we gave it to the kind of officially materialist. It gets caught in that sort of postmodern, the same stuff that's trapped anthropology in its inability to talk about spirits. But here we are in the 21st century, and there are new discoveries and new interpretations and new research and so on that's been sort of jailbroken, and it's a very exciting time. And I think there's an urgency to it for people who've grown up within this culture, particularly in its inert state. There's almost a responsibility to bellows breathe some magic back into it, even if it's not your particular road.
And I like the fact that you brought up the anthropology there, because it goes beyond Christianity. It goes into the very idea that there is one truth, and if you have a double-blind study, you reckon you can uncover what that truth is. You go right back to the kind of the very first translation of the Old Testament into Greek. There's a legend about it. There's two legends about it. One of them is that 70 scholars, the Old Testament is said to have 70 faces for every different interpretation of a verse. So 70 scholars went off and they all made a translation into Greek, and they all miraculously produced the same translation. So that's the first miracle. The second miracle is when the text was translated, then the world goes dark for 3 days. And it's described in the Talmud, the Bible in translation, the Old Testament in translation, is described as a lion in a cage. A lion in a cage, that kind of power constrained, and that idea of one truth rather than 70 different ways to read everything has gone right through into science. It's gone into law. It's gone into morality. It's gone all the way through our system, and it's all, I think, I hope, I pray even, it's all breaking down. It's breaking down. You look at the two-slit experiment, or wherever you look at quantum weirdness. One place you can look, but also getting away from these. What was it you mentioned? The 4% of I can't remember what you said actually now.
Yeah, 4% of the world's population actually, because it's still a minority in Western cultures. This kind of Guardianista, Richard Dawkins atheism, that it's basically science journalists and other idiots who don't understand science that believe this stuff. So you got like 4% of the world's population right now, and somehow that's correct.
So this is what I find wonderful about science, really. Actual scientists are often moved by revelation. So whether it's Calvin, who discovered the Calvin cycle, which is the substrates the series of chemicals which make a cycle which captures sunlight and makes it into energy, or rather makes it into a storable form of energy. That was he got that in about 20 seconds whilst he was waiting for his wife in a car park. He wasn't thinking about it. And Tesla is a great example of someone who just had visions of the AC motor or something like that. But there's a stack of examples. Some of them with psychedelics. We're talking about that guy who discovered Carrie Mullis, for example. That's another one. There's loads and loads of them. So revelation in science. You've got this wonderful thing that happens in science, and you get the revelation in science, and then you get a kind of whole layer of priestcraft, and that's like your journal editors and so on and so forth, saying what you can say and what you can't say, and then you get a layer of kind of capitalism, basically, which is marketing it to people who didn't have the revelation, didn't understand it. And what I find absolutely fascinating about that progression is that you find exactly the same thing in the different layers of text which went into making the Bible.
No,
so you've got 4 layers of text. Well, 4 layers of text, but the first 2 they're legends, they're kind of cycles of legends, and they seem to be received, or they seem to be revelation in some sense. They're written in kind of this is according to kind of textual scholars, but 10th century BC, probably in around the 8th century BC. And then a whole lot of stuff happens, a whole lot of political stuff happens. By the end of it, you've got a completely different society. And then the priests move in, and you get a whole layer of priestcraft put over that. And as the texts get combined, there's this whole new text. It's called the priestly document that goes in, and then you get the Deuteronomist. So you get Deuteronomy, which is all about kind of property law. It's all about law, basically. The first layer, you've got one law, and that is don't eat blood. And then by the end of it, you've got laws about absolutely everything, and they always defend the property owning class.
Improve revelatory encounter rates between the unconscious and the conscious, maybe, to redescribe it. You'd study it, because it's very difficult to find a transformative moment in science that hasn't been numinous And my cousin, she's moved back to Australia now, but she was an Oxford astrophysicist, and she's also a churchgoer and a fellow spectrum dweller. And what she was staying with, this is back when I was in Chiswick, and she was staying with us, and I thought, I'm gonna poke on this because here is an Oxford astrophysicist who is also a churchgoer. So I gave her the what's going on? Like, what's God? Or how are you looking out through those radio telescopes and also going and reading this book? And it was the and gloriously bug wild reasoning of how she puts these two things together. And I think this is why I refer to this sort of 4%-ish as an approximation Guardian reader types, because I have not met a scientist, and I have them in the family, who thinks that's a credible belief system, who thinks that sort of 19th century materialist scientism that, Islamophobic booksellers tweet about. They don't think it's credible, and it doesn't bother them. Like, they're busy doing the actual science and seeing they're crazy. My cousin's crazy, as we all are, but she's also not a scientismist. She's a scientist, and that I think people miss when we talk about how quote unquote science is expressed in popular culture and media and so on. It's this really dumbed down control mechanism that doesn't even accurately reflect science. It's just some sort of 19th century ghost.
Yeah, indeed. And then you get people like Gerald Schroeder, for example, the guy who wrote The Science of God. And I think it's MIT, but he's an astrophysicist and a cosmologist and an Orthodox Jew. And he looks into the days of creation it's extraordinary. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant the way he combines his cosmology and physics with the Bible. But it's high level stuff, It's not kind of half-wits bashing together ideas like kind of children bashing together blocks.
Yeah, that's pretty much a very good way of describing it. Well, Danny, this has been a fantastic chat. I love this, and it all timed very well for premium members with your presentation at Breaking Convention, which people will see below this, and your research and so on. So for people who would like to know more, what do they do, where do they go, and so on?
Right, well, they go to my website, which is Yes, you know that bit. Nemu's End, nemusend.co.uk. There's a bunch there. There's a bunch of talks and stuff. You can look at, what do you call it? You can look at Psychedelic Press website. They've got my stuff there, and Breaking Convention, as you said. I've got a Funzig talk that's the 9th of November. That's Thursday in London. That's the next one coming up. I'm giving talks all over the place, really. And you can check out my two books. So my first one is called Science Revealed. That one is about revelation in science. And it's also about the political machinations of scientific institutions. So how journals select things, how funding is allocated, how scientific controversies are settled completely outside of scientific means, so through bullying and through censorship and all that kind of jazz. And that goes into a little bit about the politics of truth and the very idea of truth. And then my second book, Neuroapocalypse, which is I'm very, very, very proud of that book. That's a lovely book. But that looks at perception, how we see, what we miss. So part of it is a comparison between the Japanese language and the English language. What do Japanese people see? What do they remember? Part of it looks at how expectation influences what we see. So, for example, if you point at a slope and you ask someone to estimate the slope, if they're old and unfit, they're more likely to overestimate it, whereas if they're young and fit, they're more likely to underestimate it. But if they're young and fit and carrying a heavy bag, they're more likely to overestimate it. So I'm looking at how the visual scene and also other senses are influenced by what's going on in our heads. And then that kind of goes through and it talks about, it does talk about psychedelics as well. That kind of goes off on one, really. That's Neuroapocalypse. Check that one out as well.
Splendid. And this stuff will all be linked up in the show notes.
Marvelous, yeah. And there's some other titles on Psychedelic Press which are definitely worth checking out. So check out the Psychedelic Press website as well.
Awesome. Well, Danny, I've kept you for long enough. It's been a great chat. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Gordon.
There you go. Psychedelics, culture, history, language, and flesh-eating bacteria. Really splendid stuff. There are some fine goodies in the show notes this week, including several of Danny's prior presentations. So if you're listening on a smartphone, be sure to check them out when you get near a computer. And once you're near a computer, you may as well subscribe to the show on YouTube or the site at runesoup.com, or check out the Runesoup Facebook page, and lucky last, find me on Twitter where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.